because content is king, right? Isn't that what we say these days?
It definitely is. And as I was going to touch on is what Bill Gates said over 20 years ago, all right? And it's never been more true than today. And it's been fun as we've worked together, just watching you guys evolve in your content strategy, seeing what's worked, what hasn't worked.
Right. Right. I mean, it's way different, you know, when I'm old, when I came into the industry, much of what we were focused on at that point was direct marketing, mailings, sending business letters, and of course calling. And I think some of those things still work and still apply, but they can't be the only thing. And you know, I think those statistics around how people are making decisions and purchasing with new vendors is really a powerful change in the evaluation process. And I think it's a really interesting way of looking at the market these days. So it should be interesting.
Yeah, you're right. And I always say all forms of marketing can work if you do them correctly. But that's always the hard part. And as you mentioned, all those things before, they still can work, but how do they work together? And
right.
There's so much clutter that's
out there. I think the key there is to think marketing system, not marketing item. Like you don't do one thing and then all of a sudden it works. You know, I have a peer in the industry. He says, you know, about 50% of my marketing budget is a complete waste of money, and the other 50%, it pays huge dividends. The problem is I don't know which is which. Yeah.
It's a very, very good point, and something we hear all too often.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Mike, you can continue to invite people as they join. I see we've got a pretty good crowd out there. So let me begin by introducing Jason Shishoka. So that's a tough name to pronounce, but Jason works with MotherG. I met him about a year ago, and has been our partner in working with our digital strategy around marketing. Today we're going to talk about marketing, what it means today. I think if you want to be a titan of industry, if you want to be a leader and grow, whether that means a small thriving company or grow to be a very large company, you're not going to get there without adding clients. And if you don't have a strong marketing strategy, you're not going to be able to bring those clients on. Elements of that include bringing the right clients to be interested in your business model. You don't want to be inundated with people that are not suited for what you do. So whether you're not for profit, whether you're a for-profit business, it really doesn't matter. Marketing is an essential element to building that business model. And marketing itself has changed, as we were just chatting briefly. When I entered industry, it was about mailing letters and postcards and having brochures. And today, most of that can play a role, but it's a subordinated role. And what the tagline really is around marketing is that content is king. And so we're going to hear from the expert, Jason. Why don't you introduce yourself, and why don't you give us a little bit of background on why you say content is king?
Well, I appreciate it, Dave, and I'm excited to talk to you guys about this. I've been in various marketing roles for the last 17 years and working with a variety of clients, both in the B2B space and B2C worlds. And my current company, Hubbard Chicago and 2060 Digital, we're a multimedia marketing company that are focused on driving business results primarily through audio, digital, and experiential solutions. And when I talk at, if it's at networking meetings, whatever it might be, what Hubbard Chicago is, often people will gravitate towards the brands we represent that they recognize the most. And often that ends up being on the broadcast or the radio side of our business. They might be a classic rock fan. They go, oh, you work with The Drive. Or they know Eric in the Morning and they say, oh, you work at The Mix, you work at a radio station. And I have to stop them and say, it's not totally true. I work for a content company. We develop premium content, and the radio stations, our digital channels, our social channels, those are all just distribution channels for our premium content. And that's what we're here to talk a lot about today, is for people that are on this call, their businesses, how do you end up becoming more of a content company that can showcase what you're able to do? And jumping into it, we talked a little bit about this as we were leading in, about content being king. As I said, it was Bill Gates. It was over 20 years ago now that he said content is king, and really struck a chord with people. And I don't think it's ever been more true than it is today. But I would also say it's good content, and good content that engages with a certain target market. And we got to think about your own business and how much content you probably already have and a wealth of knowledge. But what we want to talk about is, how do you turn that into marketing? And then how do you know the right distribution channels to engage that right target market? That's really the hard part. So, we want to spend the next 20 minutes or so like talking through what is content marketing, how it works, how do you develop some of that content, which distribution channels should you consider using, and ultimately, I think probably the most important thing, how do you use it to generate qualified leads? Because qualified leads are incredibly important, right? Now, I want to start with a definition. This is probably the best definition I've seen on content marketing, just to get started, to make sure we're all on the same page. So content marketing is a strategic marketing approach that's focused on creating and distributing valuable, relevant, and consistent content to attract and retain a clearly defined audience, and ultimately drive profitable action. I think it makes sense there. And when you think about this, it's instead of pitching your product or service, you're taking a different approach and providing value to your potential prospect. I've done a lot of training over the years, and one big takeaway that I often want people to have is you need to stop trying to sell people, because most people hate to be sold, but just about everybody loves to buy. And content marketing is a way for them to engage and understand what you can offer, and then reach out to you as a way to possibly buy your product or service. And when you use it correctly, you establish on building trust and credibility. And there's two pieces to this. You got your trust and credibility on your prospect side, the individual person, understanding what you offer and digging into your expertise. But on the other side, you also have the search engines. You look at somebody like Google, and Google is all based off of the user experience. They want to provide people resources that fit what their user is looking for. So if you have good content on your site, Google might offer you up when somebody searches for something in your category. And if somebody stays on your site for a little bit, they look through the pages, they engage with the content, Google is going to interpret that as, we provided a valuable source. And they're more likely then to suggest you the next time somebody searches for that product or service or something in the industry. On the flip side, though, you need to keep in mind, if somebody goes to your site after you were suggested by Google and they don't stay, Google says we provided a less credible source, and they're less likely to recommend you next time. So good content on your site then provides that trust and credibility, which leads to driving that website traffic, and ultimately generating the quality leads, right, which is the lifeblood of so many of our businesses. And then that should, if you properly manage those leads, lead to increased sales. I put this flow together, and it seems to most people it makes a lot of sense. But if it's so simple, then why does it seem to be so hard for so many businesses? And I want to talk through the flow and take a step back to that definition of a commonly overlooked piece. And it doesn't matter if you have an established content marketing strategy, if you have just dabbled in like putting some content out there, or if you're just like tuning into the webinar thinking about like, maybe I should look into a content marketing strategy. I've worked with people at every stage, and the most common thing they overlook is this part I've highlighted here: to attract and retain a clearly defined audience. Because without that target, what is your content really doing? If you know that target, you understand that target, you can start tailoring your information to this target. You know, as you use an example, one of our B2B clients that works in the software industry, they came to us and they already had an established content strategy, and they were getting about 15 leads per month. However, only about 20 to 30% of those leads were actually qualified leads. As our team started working with them and looking at their strategy and tweaking it around a little bit, they also looked at their targeting. And their targeting was just focused on the C-suite, which at the end of the day for their product, the C-suite will be making that buying decision, but it's really the mid-level managers that work with their product most frequently. And they're the influencers in this product. So what we did with the strategy, we tweaked it around and looked at how do we target those mid-level managers as well as the C-suite managers. And over time, they were still averaging about 15 leads per month. However, the quality went up, and the qualified leads turned to be about 80% of those 15. So going from 3 qualified leads to 12 qualified leads per month was a life changer for this business. And a lot of it came back to the targeting. Now, the way that we look at targeting then is through the marketing strategy model and this sequential process that goes into it of establishing the targeting, looking at the benefits that that target seeks, competitive perceptions, and then the positioning. And the majority of our time should be focused on these first 4 steps of this model before you ever get to the advertising, the promotion, the posting, and the sending. So to go back to start with the targeting, there's one specific question for each one of these. For the targeting, you have to think, who do you want to target? Who is going to possibly need your product or service? Once you establish that, it could be one, it could be multiple. Then we need to think through the benefits sought and ask yourself, what do they want? What do they want to potentially get from you? Once you've answered that question, moving to the next one of answering, who else can give them what they want? And you want to be very, very clear with this. Be honest and don't try to manipulate the data. Understand what your strengths are and what the strengths of your competitors are, because then you get into that positioning there of who else, like what do they want the most that you can deliver better than your competitors? Then you start looking into that content and you start looking at how do you skew the content to fit what you do best. After you establish this, you can then get into that posting, that sending, the advertising to make sure it really connects with the audience. So once you establish that target, you can move into identifying the content. And at Hubbard, we have a whole team of people that help us identify content and write it. And I was, came up with a few ideas how you can help identify the content for your company. But I was going to ask Dave and Mike, if you guys want to jump in here too, what are some of the strategies that you guys use to help develop content at MotherG?
I mean, from my perspective, a lot of it is just like spitballing ideas. Some of our best ideas come on the drive home where I'm sending, a voice message to Dave, like, hey, what do you think about this? Or if we're sitting around at our computer, I can't tell how many times at 10 o'clock at night, Dave and I are sending emails back and forth, like, here's an idea, here's my initial thoughts, let's talk about it tomorrow. It's a lot of high level conversations that starts with a little piece and that we flush out into making it something broader and more broader, but then zoom in on what's the value, why actually do the idea that we conceptualized.
I think there's an important element, because I think Mike is spot on, and it's a lot easier to identify content when you walk through that previous slide where you identify who you're trying to attract and what are their issues, what things are they interested in knowing about. So, we used to just kind of what I'll call spray and pray. We would generate a lot of content and then fire it out there and see if anybody was interested. And it really wasn't that engaging. And we know that by the analytics of what we were generating. People weren't clicking on the content, they weren't reading it, they weren't looking at our newsletters, they weren't following us on social and logging into our website. when we walk through that value proposition of understanding who are we targeting, right? We target organizations that want to be very successful in their respective area. They want to grow, they want to be profitable, they want to operate without drama. And so then when you take that one step further, we look for those organizations that then generally value technology as a driver of that value proposition. And so if that's the case, that specific area, what do they value? What information are they looking for, both as it relates to technology, but just in general? How do you engage that base? And when you start there, you start realizing that you can narrow it and call out a lot of ideas that you were coming up with. And then targeting more specific areas. And that's where Mike and I, I might read a newsletter, I might have a meeting with a client. We've sent out surveys to assess, for example, recently COVID preparedness and return to office demographic, and tried to assess what are the plaguing issues that our target base is really contending with, and then publish content that specifically is driven towards answering those questions. And then spreading that content. Once you have the idea, now a webinar maybe, we might do a podcast, we might do a newsletter, we might do a white paper, we might produce a PowerPoint that is a template, as we did on a return to office, and we just did that webinar a week or so ago and published that presentation for people to use as a tool to generate their own. And that builds engagement within the base so that they want to connect with us.
And I think one of the mistakes that people make is they think that they need to have a plethora of ideas. You need to have a new idea every week and it's got to be the best idea ever. And that's not the case. You can take one idea and then push it through different channels because people can engage with it differently. It says something different depending on the area that you're engaging with. Taking that PowerPoint, for example, Dave put together a PowerPoint with our Chief Operations Officer. We talked about it from the perspective of what went actually into creating that PowerPoint and the strategy behind our return to office plan. So that's one idea with two different avenues. And then you put it on social media and you allow people to interact with it that way and engage and say, well, here's what I would have done, or here's how I could use it for my business. So again, one idea, if you put it through different distribution channels, can evolve and draw out different perspectives that you don't necessarily get if you just go with some constant new idea all the time.
The challenge, and Jason, before, because I want to pose this to you as you talk about identifying the valuable content, our problem is not having enough ideas, but it's really having too many ideas. And we struggle always perpetually to understand which is the best idea, because you're not going to be able to take all those ideas and quote market them. How do you identify which is the best idea?
I think the most important thing is going back to what we just talked about, the targeting, and thinking about how are they really going to be able to utilize this content and this information? How are they going to interpret it? And understanding from similar clients, maybe you have a really good relationship with somebody and you can get their feedback on that and get that understanding of what's going to be most valuable, where are you going to be a biggest resource in that type of content, which I'll touch on a little bit more in a minute about being a resource, and then also making sure it's not fluff content. We don't want to do content just to do content. But the one thing I also really love about how you guys are coming up with content, you have a team of people and you're also working together. And that's how you can really start to get some of this content to come out. And a couple of the points that I put down here speak really well to that. Think about your passions and your expertise, what sets you apart. And you guys are constantly spitballing that back and forth and talking about it. Also thinking about the industry changes. How do your prospects need to possibly evolve based off the changing industry? The COVID crisis, that's a great example, what you guys came up with. It changed everybody's industry. It didn't matter how exactly it was, but you were affected one way or another. So you guys became a resource there. Another one I always like to bring up, thinking about what questions are you always getting? Ask your sales team. What is your sales team hearing before every deal closes? Or what is the last thing they hear before every deal falls apart? Understanding those questions, you can start to develop some content ahead of time. As I was preparing for this, I go back to something that I always try to think before I make any recommendations. I always have this mentality of, don't recommend any strategy or ideas you wouldn't recommend to your mom or your dad or something, just to make sure it's always good content. So it got me thinking about my stepfather, who was in business for 40 years as an electrical contractor, and he's been retired for a number of years, but I worked with him back in the late 90s on a number of jobs. And I always remember him bringing up, every time he gave an estimate, they would always say his hourly rate was more than the competition. And he would have some salesy thing that he would say. He was like, well, I mean, I'm going to do a better job and it's going to be done in half the time. So if you want some worse guys to come hang out for an extra week or two and delay the project, I'll match that hourly rate. But what's going to be best for your business? He would have some like salesy thing. But it got me thinking, that's a question he always had to answer. What if he took a step back and wrote a little content, and how do you evaluate an hourly rate? What goes into the hourly rate? What are the questions that you should be asking when you get an estimate back for electrical work? So these are some of the ways that you can start identifying the content that's most relevant for your potential target. Also looking at, if you've been at a conference, what are the insights? What are your opinions on based off of what happened? And then how-to videos. I know MotherG produced a how-to video, do a video webinar right when the COVID crisis was happening. Had some fun with it. And if you're able to do a good how-to video, it can be incredibly engaging. Now, you guys already started touching on this too. Once you identify the content, how do you know which distribution platforms to use? And it can be so incredibly overwhelming because there's blogs, and then there's social media, then there's all the channels within social media. You can do webinars like this, podcasts, email, both internal to your database, external conquest, influencer, micro and macro strategies, YouTube channels. We could go on and on. And frankly, you guys could like set up your whole year of webinars around each one of these distribution platforms, how much you could dig into it. But I think the very important thing to keep in mind for a business owner is start with that target and where are they engaging? Where do they frequent their time? Talk to your current clients. If the only social channel they're using is LinkedIn, know that, understand how they use it and how you can provide that content through there. So once you've identified where your target is from those distribution platforms, then self-reflect a little bit and what are you comfortable doing? Don't engage in a social platform like TikTok just because you hear about it, but you know nothing about it. You need to make sure you're comfortable with the channel and then start small and then continue to build up. I know Dave and Mike are going to talk in a minute about how they've built their content strategy up a little bit more, but it didn't start all the way out here. We started like it had to be a little bit smaller. So know where your target is and make sure that that you're comfortable with the channel. Now, probably one of the most important pieces that a lot of people want to know, how do you generate quality leads from content? And the best way I have seen clients that are able to do this is through premium value. Some sort of content after they're engaged in what you're doing, offer a premium value or content that can really help their business. Some ideas might be long form content. You have a concise blog, like a link out to more long form content, such as an ebook. That software clients I mentioned earlier, they use an ebook to get the qualified leads. It could be a webinar. It could be a template. Maybe there's a simple solution you can provide if they just insert their information into the template. Is it an estimate? Or is it a consultation of some sort? Or is it a service that you could provide? I use this webinar as an example when I was coming up with the idea, or what is an example of another service. You may recall when you registered, we talked about setting up for a social audit. And when our clients engage in a social audit, just about every single time you find tremendous value from the clients in that audit. But at the end of the day, my whole goal for this audit is provide information of value that you can implement immediately. If I'm able to provide that value, maybe through the conversation, it comes up that we need to have a longer form strategy conversation. But if nothing else, you're going to better understand what we offer. I'm going to have already provided some value to you. And if I can't help you, you might find another business owner that I can help and maybe refer me to have a conversation with them. So think about those types of services. What can you offer that might be similar? And then when you're coming up with this type of value, make sure you fail quickly, because every industry is different, and each client might be a little bit different. And how do you end up by getting the qualified leads? And you need to test various things. And anytime I think about failing quickly, I think of an article I read years ago, and it said, Google, the biggest failure of all time. And instantly it's, whoa, wait, what are you talking about? Google's not a failure. It's one of the biggest success stories of all time. And the point of it was Google tries so many different things, and they embrace failure. Their whole idea is try some things, give it some time to work, and if it's taken off, invest more. If it's not, throw it in the failure bin and move on to the next one. So you need to make sure you're doing that with your content strategy as well. And then lastly, be honest. Be honest about the quality of leads. Have your sales team be honest about the quality of leads, because not all leads are created equal. And if you're not getting quality leads, and then it's going to be more of a time waste than not having any leads at all. So as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about MotherG, some content you guys might be familiar with, and how their content strategy has evolved into multiple distribution channels.
Yeah, I mean, we started really from the blog standpoint, and when we started, it was what should we blog about? It was kind of that rando, unintentional sort of topic du jour that we would write a blog about. And as we started doing it, we realized we really needed a strategy around the content. And it's when we walked through that journey of trying to understand what our buyers' discussion points would be and why they would want to read our blogs. They're not going to want to read a blog about how to manage your HR benefits from MotherG. They may exactly want to learn, why would I want to outsource my technology support versus keeping it in-house? Or how do I go about selecting a new partner? Or, our idea around this content evolved to the point that we want to explain to that business leader what technology support should look like in their business, regardless of whether it's MotherG or it's some other external partner or their internal department. What should that technology look like? What kind of value should it be derived from? And as we started thinking about that as a driving point, because we understood those were questions that our buyers wanted to know and walk through, then we started building that content. We built it in blogs, then we created a newsletter that really published those blogs in a more cohesive manner, and we got that out the door.
And part of that,
go ahead, Mike.
sorry, and so part of that too is understanding the strengths of our internal team. So, candidly, Dave is a dynamic speaker, and his strength isn't necessarily just writing a blog that's going to be interesting or it's going to set the world on fire. But if you talk to Dave for 10 minutes, you're going to get more content out of those 10 minutes than a 2,000 word blog that really digs into what he's trying to explain. And so understanding where our strengths are internally helped us pick those distribution channels and figure out what's our lead going to be.
Good point, Mike, which is what led us to the podcast, because I like to talk a lot. So, we had this idea, Midwest Mavericks, the people that really drive industry in Chicago, Milwaukee, kind of Midwest, heartland of, the people that really, drive our economies here. And so we developed that, and that led us into the webinar series, in which really COVID-19 pushed us forward in the webinar area because we couldn't be out in front of people as much. Speaking opportunities were less. And so it gave us a venue to invite people to share these ideas and participate.
And I mean, it really does fit into the overall message that MotherG delivers, that yes, we're a technology company and we're going to make sure that you're safe, stable, and secure. But realistically, we align your technology to your business goals. If you want to be this titan of industry in your category, you need technology to drive you forward. And technology can help not just from making sure your computer turns on, but it can also help you with the programs that you need. You can have a more efficient manufacturing shop floor. You're going to be able to generate reports with Power BI quicker. That's going to not waste your financial team's time in generating budgets and things that take a while. So technology touches all areas of your business, and that includes marketing. And so that's why we felt it was necessary to have this conversation today. Is technology and marketing go hand in hand, and some of the things that we're able to use technology for helps us generate this content that delivers the message overall that MotherG is your business partner.
Yeah, and Mike, that's a great point, because without technology, our marketing really would not be very pervasive. Certainly a website, right? Well, everyone's got a website. They've been around now for a long time. Of course, I remember a day when there were no websites, but that's not really what we're talking about. The ability to build a database, market to that database, observe how they're engaging with us, evaluate it across multiple different delivery platforms. All of that really wouldn't be possible without a team of people or technology to automate it. And since we can't afford a team of people, we're able to have what might be considered a large company type marketing system, even though it's really managed, frankly, by the two people that are on this call, Jason and Mike.
Mm-hmm. And I was also going to bring up another point about how content builds on each other, which you guys touched on earlier. But when the COVID crisis happened, you may recall we received a note from our program director mentioning that for our adult contemporary station, that he wasn't going to change formats, but he wanted to create more content that was relevant for the listeners. So the things that was informational content, just to intersperse between the music and other programming. And when he brought this up, he was bringing up healthcare professionals, people that we might be able to have on for interviews. But my mind instantly went to Dave, because I had just seen your COVID-19 resource page, and I knew how IT people were freaking out because working from home is a huge security risk. So I shot a note back and I said, what do you think about this angle? Here's a link to some of Dave's content. Do you want me to see if he'd be interested in an interview? And because you had that content and had that space in my mind, it then led to getting an interview, and then it led to a couple more interviews because Jay actually really enjoyed the conversation, and you were able to be on air and speak to a couple million people.
Right. Yeah, it's good stuff.
So we've talked about quite a bit, and I know some people that really need to simplify like the strategy, and we talk a lot about the trial and error too. And I want to give a few takeaway points here if you are just starting with the strategy, things to save on some of that trial and error. And to start, being a resource. You want to make sure that you are a resource first. So often we want to have a strategy and see those leads come immediately. And you need to have a goal with the leads in mind, but the focus has to be on how are you being a resource for that target audience. If you follow the process, it will start to trickle in to get those qualified leads as you refine. Having patience and consistency. It might sound like when we talk about patience that it contradicts the fail quickly idea, but you have to have enough patience to see if the idea has failed and maybe tweaking a little bit along the way. Give it time to get legs. If it's not getting any legs, then you just say you cut that out. And then the consistency piece, we mentioned this a little bit earlier too. Activity does not mean engagement, especially when it comes to things like social channels. I always go back to something we all either learn from our mom or somebody. If you don't have something nice to say or good to say, don't say anything at all. If you don't have good content, don't do anything at all until you get good content that's truly engaging. Otherwise, you might hit that right audience and they put a wall up in front of you. avoid promoting your company directly. Keep in mind with content marketing, we're trying to get them to think more about buying from us versus selling them on your product and service. And trying to keep it concise. Your content, especially if you think about your blog, should be concise. I really personally like when I see that it's only 2 to 3 minutes and I think, oh, I can allocate 2 to 3 minutes to read this right now. If I see something really long, more often I'm going to then think, you know what, let me put this to the side. I'll get back to it later. And then things end up happening. And how often do you just not get back to that content? So keep it concise and then maybe link to that longer form content.
If I could just interrupt you there, Jason, that's actually a great point, and a helpful tip and trick that we use is we know that, people are quite busy. And so we try to give 3 bullet points on why you should read this piece of content right up front. And then it helps you decide quickly because, again, we don't want to waste your time. This piece of content might not be valuable to you particularly at this moment, but at least you're still getting the overall concept of it. And you're going to be able to make a decision there. And then when you go back for us in the future, you're going to know that we're not going to waste your time with just some long bloviated thing just to fill SEO space.
Right. Yep. Great point. And then something else that you guys talked about, getting your team, your friends, your family involved to come up with that long list of content. So you have a bunch of ideas to pick from what's going to be most relevant to your target. And then lastly, but certainly not least, don't let a good or bad review go unutilized. And this is a review, somebody's engagement on social media. Too often I end up seeing businesses where they get a bad review and they're like, shut it down, hide it, delete the review, delete that comment. But try to embrace it. Try to look at that bad review as an opportunity to understand what somebody's concern was, address the situation in a public forum, and then take it offline. If you're able to do that, you have to kind of give yourself a break as a business owner and know no business is perfect. I'm yet to meet the perfect business that never has made a mistake or never had a disgruntled client or customer. So embrace it as an opportunity to show that you're a real person and address those situations and move on.
Yep. And if I would add, a great place to go find some of that content is with your existing customers. Those are people that are friendly to you. They have the same problems as your prospects, and they understand why they wanted to do business with you. And so asking them some questions that trouble them about how would they evaluate the decisions that align with what your business does can lead you to some really great ideas. Yeah,
it's a great point. So we're trying to bring this all together for people, and how do you get started, especially if you haven't even thought at all about content strategy yet? And as a refresher, we need to go back to segmenting that target or targets. And from there, identify that long list of potential content pieces and understanding which channels might make the most sense. But if you don't know which channels might make the most sense, just start simple. And that might start with writing that concise blog of your ideas. You start there and then maybe pick 1 or 2 social channels to promote that blog. So starting small there and manageable, because content marketing can get really overwhelming, especially if you don't have that full team to develop it. And then you can start building it up from there as you learn what works best. So that was it for the slides that we had prepared for today and to talk about. Any other thoughts that you wanted to add, Dave and Mike?
No, I do think it can be overwhelming. I think your key point there is start small, but also start. Don't wait. Don't let any of those things that we said you should do become excuses for not getting started. Writing a blog and then putting it on your website is not that difficult to do. It is not much more than simply articulating a conversation you would have with a coworker about a certain topic. Write it down, put it on your website, and then link it to your LinkedIn and Facebook page and see if anybody clicks. And then write another one, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later. Do at least one a month and see what happens and just get started. I think that's, we we took too long to get started. And once we got started, it allowed us to start iterating and developing. And now it's a habit that we have now as an organization. I think that's key.
Yeah, I think that's, you use the right word, habit. I was going to say marketing is a muscle. And so the more that you work it out and you try different workouts and you use it consistently, that's when you get better and you get stronger and you're able to push the ball forward, essentially. But I did have a question for you, Jason. So if I'm sitting here and I'm a business that doesn't do any of this at the moment, would you recommend starting with a blog, and what distribution channel would you push it for social media wise?
I think you have to go back to that target. We have to really think about what we were talking about of where are your current clients engaging and where do they spend a lot of their time. So it depends on your business, depends on your target, but the most common places, and I would recommend starting, would be through LinkedIn and Facebook. That is the most common, the channels people are going to be engaging with.
Do you think that tonality becomes an issue for a lot of folks? Do you think that they try to be too funny or too serious? What's your feeling on that?
Yes, and just depending on your business personality, usually will dictate if you're overly professional or you're overly casual. But I would definitely lead more toward the side of being more casual with your content. And you have to think about that audience and how do they want to be spoken to, but you want to be a little lighthearted in this content. If you're overly professional on like all the content, it's not going to be as entertaining while also useful.
I want to post a reminder that Jason is offering, and Hubbard, Chicago is offering a free 30-minute social audit. That was part of the questionnaire when people registered. So I know that it'll take probably a couple of weeks to get through everyone and schedule those calls. So be patient. Jason, if you want to talk a little bit about that and what that section looks like.
Yeah, and what we'll do is I'll reach out to each person individually and to talk you through the process there and establish a timeline when we'll be following up. Our strategists will dig into your channels. We'll come up with our analysis, and then we'll schedule that 30-minute conversation to walk through that analysis and then talk about some of the ideas that you can implement in those channels. And if that time you wanted to talk about some other content ideas specific for your business, just let me know, and when I follow up to schedule the meeting, we can make sure we do that.
And I'd encourage everyone to give it a shot just to see what it looks like. It's a worthy exercise. Regardless of what action you take, you'll gain insight to how your business is viewed and perceived. And I think, keep in mind, most consumers today, both business as well as personal retail side, have gone through over 60% of the decision process before they ever contact you. So understanding how you're perceived in the market is essential in being viable in the coming decade.
And then just another note, all of this will be online by the end of the day. So if there's any part that you've missed or you want to share it with another coworker or business leader, it'll be readily available so that way people can have access to it.
Okay.
Well, thank you again for having me, Dave and Mike. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks, Jason.
Thanks,
And,
Jason.
Go Reds.
Go Man U.
Bye now.
Take care. All right.